Hello friends, we just finished taking a look at Captain Kirk, and today we get to move into the next generation. It's Captain Picard. Now, I don't know what it is about the face exactly, but it does not look like Patrick Stewart, really. I mean, it does technically look like Patrick Stewart. I mean, Patrick Stewart is bald. This is kind of the color of his skin, but, like, his nose is just not that narrow, it seems. I mean, I think Patrick Stewart has kind of a broad nose and kind of a round face in general, and it looks like they just kind of squished his head, so everything's like kind of more narrow than it should be. And then the second issue I'd mentioned with the uniform, everyone's going to point out these lines and be like, what are they doing there? Well, guess what, friends? They were on the show. That's right. Patrick Stewart did indeed wear this uniform with these little lines. Now, there are a few things to say about that. Everybody, well, not everybody, but every Trekkie knows that in the first two seasons of The Next Generation, TNG, they had these spandex uniforms that were real tight, and they had no collars, and they had these lines, this, whatever color you are. In Picard's case, it was the red line that goes through the black part here. Then they got rid of it and replaced it with more or less this uniform, right? And you're like, well, that uniform didn't have lines. Correct, it didn't, except at first. Patrick Stewart wore this uniform with these little lines sewn into it for all of 3 episodes. I kid you not. So TNG seasons 1 and 2 has the spandex that nobody likes. And then seasons 3 through 7 and some of the first generation's movie have the uniform we all know, except for like a handful of episodes where they have these lines. And then McFarlane didn't even get it right, because there weren't just these lines on those transitional uniforms. There were also dart lines coming out from the side under the armpit, and they didn't sculpt those for some reason. But even so, on those actual uniforms that Patrick Stewart wore for all of 3 whole episodes, the lines weren't this noticeable, really. So why they didn't just go with season 4, 5, 6, or 7 uniform, or even the majority of season 3's uniform, I do not know. But beyond those issues, I do like the sculpt. I mean, it's a good face sculpt. Even if it doesn't look like Patrick Stewart, it does indeed look like a human. I like how the hair is sculpted and it's painted very neatly. I like how the pips on the collar, that's what these are called. They are rank insignias, the number of pips you have, 4 for a captain, and those are all sculpted and they're all painted very cleanly. The badge, the comm badge, is a raised sculpted detail, and it makes much more sense here on Patrick Stewart, Picard, I should say, than it did on Captain Kirk, because it is badge that goes on there. And then I like how he's got folds sculpted into his uniform and on his pants, really. And I like how they even got the detail of the pants being like cut at the bottom in that weird way. I don't think we were really meant to see that or notice that in the show, but that's how they were. Anyways, if we talk about the paint, he's got some shiny boots or dress shoes. I don't know if the TNG cast wore boots, really. I mean, the original series, they had boots because they were out on planets doing away missions and getting their feet dirty, and Picard's just sitting in his office in the meantime. Anyways, the legs, they're just black. There's not really much to say. The butt sculpt has this weird little flaps that I guess cover the joints when you move the hips, but other than that, there's not much else to talk about in the sculpt, really. The paint on the red part, I mean, the paint's all clean everywhere, but if you look closely, there's like this dark wash, and I don't know. Kirk didn't really have that, but it's here. I don't really dislike it, but it's also not really necessary. Like, you can see very subtle dark spots in the uniform, like right here on the shoulder in particular. So that's sort of a personal preference thing, but overall, the paint's pretty good. It's the sculpt on the head that's the real problem. And then this uniform, I mean, I don't know why they chose it, but it's mostly accurate to that transitional uniform they wore for literally a couple of episodes. So, I mean, yeah. Anyways, forgetting about uniforms, let's move on to articulation. So a lot like Kirk, the ball joint is not ideal here, but I'll give him this. Picard can at least look up and down better than Kirk could, although I still wish there was a hinge in there like Marvel Legends. But it's an improvement over Captain Kirk, and he can go all the way around, of course. And another improvement, his shoulder, it goes just as high, it goes to 90 degrees, but unlike Kirk, it doesn't look like total garbage. So that's a plus. There's a hinge and swivel elbow, just like Kirk. It's fine, just like Marvel Legends. And there's a ball joint and hinged wrist, although unlike Kirk, his cuff has a little bit more space, so you can actually bend it a little more. It's not like a super bend, like 90 degrees or anything, but it's something a little bit better. What's really better, though, is the waist. It can actually swivel. There's no separate sculpted material hanging over the hips to prevent that. He goes all the way around like an action figure should. How about that? The hips are Mattel style H hips, I've heard them called. They can go pretty far forward, pretty much 90 degrees to sit in a chair, and pretty good backwards. He can also do the splits, a total 180 there. He's got hinge and swivel knees. They're not quite as ratchety as Kirk, but the ratchet things are in there. And then he's got ball joint feet that pretty much don't move at all. Like, you just wiggle them, and that's really it. So the articulation is about just as mediocre as Kirk, but it's certainly implemented a lot better. So points there for PICARD. PICARD comes in the same sort of blister card packaging that Captain Kirk did, except his color up at the top is the command red from his show instead of Kirk's gold, obviously. And then there's this sort of drawing of someone who's supposed to look like Patrick Stewart. But, you know, the figure didn't look like Patrick Stewart either, so whatever, it's not a big deal. On the back, we get pictures of the figures, obviously, and pictures of the characters that are supposed to get figures coming out eventually. Anyways, let's open this guy up already, right? The back of the card art has the same sort of transporter effect lines that Captain Kirk did, and now I guess I see why they chose this effect, even though it didn't look like TOS for Captain Kirk. It's just so that they could have the same sort of generic transporter effect for all the figures in the Star Trek line. Anyways, unfortunately, Captain Picard still has those weird twist ties that don't go all the way around, so you kind of have to cut them up front, and I mean, you usually have to cut these snap tie things, the plastic ones that don't actually untwist, but I don't like doing it on these because they're on the side with the figure, and once is not good enough. You gotta do it twice. I don't want to damage the figure with the stupid knife or scissors you gotta jam in here. It's kind of cruddy, McFarlane. Let me do this. Well, now Picard is free. For accessories, Picard comes with the base that says Star Trek, exactly the same as the one that Captain Kirk had. Next, he comes with a Next Generation Dustbuster type phaser, the Resican flute from the Inner Light, and an alternate right hand to help with playing that flute. Now, there were a few different phaser props used on the Next Generation, and the one this looks to be based off of is really accurate, except for the fact these buttons on the black part that are black are actually supposed to be silver, I think, but otherwise it's really accurate to the show, and they did call these things Dustbusters on the set, but, I mean, they are Type 2 phasers just like in the original series. Anyways, Picard comes packaged with the right hand that is supposed to hold the Dustbuster phaser, and his thumb gets on the button just fine. He looks pretty great holding it, I think, and it's a great grip. No complaints, really. Let's pop that other hand on and try and get him in a pose where he can hold his other flute. And I must say, his alternate right hand is kind of hard to pop on, and I don't know, I wish there was like a clear click. I think it's on as good as it can go. Maybe I'll just keep squishing it for a little while. One thing I like about this alternate right hand is that even though I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be for playing the flute, it totally looks like the make it so finger. So that is kind of cool. Anyways, let's get the flute in there and see what we can do. So it's actually a lot easier to shove the non-mouthpiece part of the flute down this hand instead of trying to shove the mouthpiece up through the hand, I find. And then once you get it in there, Picard can look pretty good with his fingers holding it, although you kind of have to use perspective trickery to get it to look like he's actually bringing it to his mouth, because yeah, I can't really do it with two hands. I mean, maybe with one. Let's try. We'll see. Nope, I can't do it, really. He just won't go to his mouth. It can get it to touch his head, pretty much, but not really his mouth. Well, aside from that, at least the flute looks really nice. They really painted all the details, even this little tassel thing, so that is really cool, I think. Good job on the flute, McFarlane, and good job including it in the first place. Moving on to the scale now, Captain Picard stands at about 7¼ inches tall, which makes him a little taller than Kirk from the same line, and about the same height as the Art Asylum Spock. But way too big to fit in with any 6-inch figures, unfortunately. Ultimately, friends, this Captain Picard figure is kind of a mixed bag. He's got some improved articulation over Captain Kirk, but I really hesitate to say the articulation is good when there is no ab crunch diaphragm joint. It's just one solid piece of plastic at the torso. So even though his articulation's better than Kirk, that doesn't make it good. And then the sculpt is, well, worse than Kirk. On the face especially, at least. Anyways, he does come with some neato accessories, so you could definitely do a lot worse. I don't necessarily recommend him, but he's a decent enough figure. Well, that's all. Until next time, peace out, YouTube.